Oh, good. Ooh.
Okay, here we go. We're gonna have to redo that whole intro. Sorry about that,
Oh
guys.
no.
Yeah, everybody on Discord heard it. Sorry about that, guys. Okay.
Oh,
Thank you, guys.
It's a great intro.
Yeah, it's a good intro. Sorry about that, guys. Welcome to Dungeoneer Pack Live. My name is Josh. Thank you guys for watching. Dungeoneer Pack Live is a weekly live stream where I and guests discuss topics for D&D 5th edition to provide insider solutions for problems you may have at the table. This week, we're talking about how to roleplay a better cleric. And we're going to be looking at the character fantasy, some of how the mechanics influence that character fantasy, and also look at the themes and how they can hopefully help you improve making a better character and also improve your roleplay for playing a cleric. This week, joining me, I have Wally DM and Riker from the Cleric Corner. Thank you guys for joining me on this one. I know, Wally, you dabble into character builds every so often, so hopefully with your insight too, we can take a look. And Riker, you're all flavor, all flavor. So
Always.
this is in your wheelhouse, your wheelhouse, especially with the name Cleric Corner.
Yes.
What's going on? I'm seeing everybody here in the chat. Wolfsbane, thank you for showing up. Kickscar, Sanctissimus, Red Wolf, Ebrav. And yeah, sorry about the sound, guys. I had it muted on there and my let's just say my programming on my little Stream Deck didn't take off the mute, so
Just making sure they were paying attention.
yeah. All right, so we're going to kick this off with the first question. Also, if you guys have any questions, just throw them in the chat and we'll get them up on the screen for you guys. So the first question regarding this: how much weight does or should a cleric's faith have on the character itself?
good question.
You want to take this one, Wally?
I'll take this one, sure. So I'm probably going to lead off a lot of my answers the way, a lot the same way, and that is, I think as a player, however much you want to dive into being a cleric, if you want to go high end on your faith and with your deity and stuff like that, then more power to you. I would highly encourage that. If you want to kind of keep that on the low end of your character, then I would be fine with that too. And so as far as myself personally, as playing a cleric, I like to dive in. I like to have my character's faith front and center. I would like to bring it up a lot. I'd be doing like, let me say a quick prayer for you before we go to battle, kind of a thing. Just Timora be with you, or I would definitely dive into and embrace a lot of the character's faith.
Yeah. I personally think that like it honestly does depend on the player's flavor, how they want to play it, as well as the communication with the DM. Because I feel like there's also a two different ways a cleric can go. One way is I want a god and I want to be faithful to that god, and I'm pursuing um, their tenets in every way that I possibly can. But then there's also like the chosen one trope, where it's more that the god has chosen the cleric, maybe whether they like it or not, but then they are gifted with these powers and maybe they struggle with the tenets. So it's just a fun narrative that can be explored in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, and for me, like, depending on how much weight you put on it, if you're looking to play a cleric, um, it gives the opportunity for the DM really to give you, or to give them a hook, or yeah, toys. That's why I refer to it. Like, you give the DM toys, so that they can actually include your god a little bit more. Like, currently in my Avernus campaign, I have a buddy playing a wizard cleric multiclass, and the big thing was like he started really digging into like his role play with Torm, who's his main big deity to help him fight devils and demons. And yeah, and the big thing is like by him just saying, yeah, I want to pick up my book. I want to start learning and reading passages on my downtime. And then started saying small prayers here and there to other players as he's casting certain spells. Allowed me to really start having Torm have a bigger presence in the game. So like if you're wanting to play a cleric and you kind of lean into that faith and give it a little bit more weight in your role play, it actually helps your DM, because they can be like, okay, well, if you're doing this, well, if you're saying a prayer, maybe later on the DM can drop a little trinket, or a little bless here, or the God's presence somehow manifests in your area, regardless of the plane.
I really like that thought process, and it kind of just springs to mind. So if I were playing a cleric, let's say we're in a campaign or games that are a lot of traveling, I would even go as far to like, okay, so everybody's going to go to the tavern and have some drinks to celebrate. Well, maybe perhaps my cleric's really devoted and I want to play that faith up. Then I would be like, well, I want to check out the local chapter for Torm and go, go check out and visit with fellow priests or cleric in this city. Introduce myself, maybe be a bit of an ambassador, see if role play it out where perhaps we can, I can bring something to the table that they don't have, or things along those lines. And the same with like if we're like investigating a library or something, but like, hey, is there any tomes on Timora here? Is there any tomes on Lathander that I can check out? And you kind of think of it a little bit different than you would other players that, or other characters where their main goal is they come into an area is just to proceed with adventure and stuff like that. And with a cleric, I just think you're trying to find things to enhance your faith to grow on it.
Yeah, and to add on to that too, like the complete polar opposite. Maybe you want to play a cleric who you start off the game with less weight on your faith. Maybe your character is having a crisis of faith, and that through this adventure they're learning to discover and reconnect with their god, or maybe find another god or somewhere that aligns with their own morality, or their own their morality, or their or whatever they're trying to go for the adventure. Because
Yes.
yeah, because I don't see it too often. Because normally clerics, the big narrative is like your faith and your connection to your god powers you. This is how you get your magic. This is how you train to get your proficiencies, etc. But a lot of people immediately go in. It's like, yes, for example, because Tempest Cleric's like super in my head right now, because I just put the video out for it, and it was just I follow Thor. I'm the disciple of Thor. I go in and I shoot lightning and thunder, and just go smash things. And immediately a lot of players just kind of play into that from the get-go. And I think finding your way and actually start off with a weak faith at the beginning of the game and learning to grow gives you a good character development, because and it allows your DM to again give them more toys to get to add there, and maybe even put obstacles in your way to really test your character's faith, and maybe that's when you decide, I'm no longer going to be a cleric of Thor. I'm going to be a cleric of Odin or something like that. You just switch up.
Hmm. You just gave me like nerd chills like 3 times. I'm excited that we're talking about
Yeah.
this content. I mean, I don't know if I've made that clear before, but it's just this is one reason why I love Cleric so much is because you get to explore like the human condition in a lot of ways. You can do that with any other class, obviously, but I think that exploring beliefs and exploring how you view the world and what tenets are important to you, what do you value over other things is one reason that I love exploring D&D and what it can do for us. I mean, it's obvious in the community that D&D is also used in a lot of therapy,
Yeah.
right? It's used for a lot of people in reflecting on oneself because I feel like a lot of the characters or most characters that we make are a little bit of ourselves that we want to play out. And so it's the way that we get to explore, okay, how do I view these beliefs maybe differently from my player or from my character? And throughout the narrative or throughout the story, how does that influence this person's decisions versus maybe what I'd make? Or maybe I'd make the same ones. And maybe it's different than what you think that you would have chosen, depending on what happens. I love that.
Yeah. Okay, we got our first question from the chat from Old Spain. What about clerics who have no god but a faith in a creed or moral code? Which actually brings up to one of the questions I did ask. Can you play a cleric that doesn't doesn't follow a god?
Yes.
Would you like to elaborate on
Yeah.
that?
Well, in the I think both the Dungeon Master's Guide and Xanathar's Guide to Everything both state that the cleric doesn't need a god to have power, right? I think in a lot of ways it's similar to the paladin, where there's an oath or there's a tenet or there's a belief that they adhere to that gives them that power. And I have a video about clerics, go figure, that goes into this a little bit more. But it's just that it's like it's getting power from your will alone or from the concept of these things. Because gods in and of themselves don't have to be sentient beings. They can be ideals and be considered gods anyways. Like nature in and of itself could be considered a god. Because it is this higher thing, this thing that maybe we don't understand, and drawing power from that similar to a god. Obviously, it depends on your campaign as well, and what the lore is, and how the gods are influenced there. And I think we'll touch on that later. But yeah, I think that it's a cleric following a god is just a cleric following a certain way of living.
Yeah, and I will double down on that. There's actually just certain settings in official 5th edition that don't have gods. Like they're just the gods are not present or they don't exist on the plane. While traditional fantasy like Forgotten Realms, gods are established. We know for a fact that they exist. They walked Faerun at certain points, or they don't, and they come back every so often. Ravnica, there's no gods on Ravnica. There's, if you go into the lore of more of the Magic Gathering, there were old gods, and then the Gruul clans, which are the green red, the not barbaric but shamanistic faction. They believe in some of these old gods, but they've never really physically manifested. And then you have the Boros Legion, which they can have their faith in the Legion itself and in the military might of their, and then they follow angels, and they still have divine powers. And it's mainly to and it's mainly to kind of help heal, and the ultimate goal is protect the city of Ravnica. Their faith is in Ravnica itself. And then you got settings like Eberron, where the gods are not known to exist. They have faith, but there's no proof that they exist. So there's like the Church of the Silver Flame. They get their powers from believing in their code, and also believing in the light and being able to stop demons. So it is very, very, very easy to find other ways in a lot of different official settings just themselves that you do not have to have a god. You can follow a creed or moral code, and as long as you tie your cleric's faith, they have to have that faith, that belief in that code. And it's more so hinging on that core essence of fully believing in what their convictions is where you can draw your power from, which is slightly different. I would say the big difference from Paladin is that Paladin follows that code. They don't necessarily have to believe it. They just like, this is the code and this is where I get my power. And this is what I do. It's more martial, while Cleric's like, I believe in this with full intention and in my heart, you know?
Another trope. Oh, sorry, Wally.
I like both of those ideas there, and immediately what I start to think of is whatever subclass that you're picking. So, like you mentioned, nature itself could be the god or where they draw from. So, if you want to play the nature domain, that's a great place to start. And then with that, I was thinking Arcana domain. Maybe my character found this old mystical tome that was up in his grandmother's attic or something like that, brought it down and started reading it, and then just began to believe everything that was in there. Perhaps there was some symbols in there, and then he would make like put on a shield or maybe make and craft something of a symbol that he found inside that book. And then now I have this Arcana domain cleric or arcane domain cleric that all of his faith and belief comes from what he found in these tomes. And perhaps now he's going out looking for more of these tomes. Maybe the story was like the first movie of Lord of the Rings, it just ended and you had to wait for the next one. So he's like, I read all that, now I gotta go find these other books.
Yeah. And another trope that I really love that I touched on before is there's a thing, especially in Christianity, of like laying on of hands, right? Where power is passed down from other elders to someone in their fold, right? Giving them some sort of priesthood or responsibility or something like that. And I feel like would be a fun way for a cleric to get their power that way as well. Maybe not directly from a god, but by their leaders, by the hierarchy, where one is passing down their power to the next. And you could say that that has more like a warlocky feel. If that's the case, I think that's awesome. But just it begs the question, with narrative as well. If you're a DM that wants to do this, is this power really coming from this god, or is it coming from something else? Right?
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of I don't know if people in the chat have seen it or if you guys have seen it. There's an anime Gurren Lagann. There's an episode. It's a fighting robot, big old mecha robot show that's very has like a short run. But there's an episode where it's exactly that. There's this kid that they kind of crash land into this underground sanctuary, and it's all faith based, but they believe that this actual robot is their god. And it's just this face, and then when they towards the end of the episode, they realize no, it's actually a giant robot that they need to help fight other robots. And the kid has a crisis of faith and just leaves because he's like, I'll go with the main heroes of the thing of the show because you kind of lied to me my whole life. So it's like, but yeah, it kind of reminds me of that. It's like, yeah, there's that little bait and switch, like what you thought was what you believed in wasn't necessarily what you believed in, and it actually comes from another source of power.
False gods are a fun thing to play with.
Yeah. All right, we got a question from Sanctimus. Thank you for the 25 super chat. Thank you. How would you handle an order domain cleric of Asmodeus who really wants to spread his worship and influence in the material plane? I've yet to find a DM who really even attempt it. I have an immediate answer. Well, and I think you guys are thinking on it. I can see it in your face right here. I currently play with two players that are playing necessarily in the alignment system. They would be considered evil. The big thing, or obviously this touches more on playing evil characters, but I wouldn't mind it. I think as a player, if you're going to approach and play an evil character, the reason why DMs and groups have reservation on it is because people's interpretation of evil is very skewed. I would say it's not necessarily. Everybody has the same concept of evil. But if you're going to play a evil, especially order domain cleric for Asmodeus, the big thing is I would always consider, and the reason why my two evil characters in my group work is because they have to use the party to get to their end goal. So they make sure the party stays alive so that they themselves can do what they need to do by the end of the campaign. They don't necessarily need to be friends, and one of the players actually makes sure to make digs at some of the more righteous characters in the group just to let them know, like, yeah, I'm evil, but here's a little slight, here's a little smack talk, but I'm still gonna save you and protect you, so you can protect me, sort of thing. So, but order domain, it's interesting. Asmodeus, most people won't consider devils in general to be clerical. Like there were no divine faith, but Asmodeus technically is a god, and I think you should lean into with this kind of character a more of a rigid structure, a more of a like if for those familiar with DC Comics, Darkseid, he's the evil new god that's all about order, and I would lean into that. They act more strict. They don't really like to. They may seem like they're boring, but it's one of those things like you can play into the order domain. Is like, yeah, you're strict, you're boring, you follow the rules, and you only bend them to your will as long as they're within reason. And then you always try to make deals because your patron's a devil, and you can kind of lean into the party face a little bit too. You're not necessarily charming, but you sort of kind of just try to get your way and make sure people follow what they need to do. Hopefully that's my answer from my end.
Yeah, I agree with all that. This is probably how I would do it if your cleric was good aligned. With being a cleric of Asmodeus, obviously you're worshiping this character, but to me, lore is not law, and your cleric doesn't necessarily have to like doing that. They could have some sort of deal with this with Asmodeus, where they may have a loved one that's given their soul to some sort of pact to Asmodeus. And in order to get that soul back, they made a deal with Asmodeus to go out and get other souls as a trade. And he asked you, like, hey, how many souls is this loved one worth to you? And you have to go and get that many souls to trade. And so you spread that influence and worship of Asmodeus to other creatures. And to me, I don't know, I like that.
You kind of hit what I was thinking as well, is maybe a forced contract, doing this to try to save someone, or try to help someone. You're put between a rock and a hard place. The way that I look at an evil cleric would be, I think, from a dungeon master's perspective. I mean, because there's several ways to play evil.
Yeah.
I think you can play it a right way, and I think you could most absolutely play evil in a wrong way. And from a DM's perspective, it's got to be able to mesh with the other players. If everyone's playing good aligned characters with good intentions, you could probably bring this cleric in that worships Asmodeus, but there's going to have to be, that player is going to have to follow some guidelines. Otherwise, you're going to have a mess of a campaign that's only going to go a few sessions. So if from a DM's perspective, if someone were to bring this character to me and say, I want to play this, order cleric that, for Asmodeus, I think we'd have to set some boundaries. I'd have to figure out what the intentions, or, what are some evil things that this character would do. And then I would have to just judge on whether or not it would mesh with the rest of the party. But I do think it would be fun to play this character, and I think it's feasible. I think if you played it right, I think it would be a lot of fun. I think it would create some fantastic stories within your group. But again, it's going to be dependent on how you play it.
Yeah, and then actually to touch on two other things, is we really digged into, if you intentionally know your character is going to be an evil character. But on the flip side, maybe your character is part of a cult and they don't realize it's evil. Like, you can just play an Asmodeus order domain cleric, and they're unwilling. They have no idea that Asmodeus has a bad rep, and they believe in their faith because they only see the good in it, and they might be part of a cult and they don't realize it. So it's them. That's part of maybe the journey this character can have, is like they're breaking away, sort of seeing the world and realizing, oh, the things I was believing are not seen in a good light, and how do they reconcile that? And that's a good character progression. Where
Asmodeus could go by a different name too.
Yeah, and exactly, because he would. Asmodeus is the chief devil, so he definitely is lying. Will be lying. So that's another way you can take it too. They just don't realize that that's what they're believing in it is considered evil or bad.
Yeah.
This is a good way. Yeah, absolutely. This is a good way to create a backstory as well. If you're going to play this character, perhaps they were and a street urchin and was taken in by this leader of order to Asmodeus, and like you said, maybe went by a different name or something. So maybe they grew up in this and no different. They've always been an acolyte to Asmodeus and didn't even know it. So I think it creates some good backstory. I think there's a lot of great backstory moments that you could create to help explain why they're such a firm believer.
All right, I'm trying to get through everybody's questions that I'm seeing, and I'm also seeing super chat. So thank you, Will Spain. I'll get to your Thank you for the 5. I will jump into your question in just a second. Luke had one. It's been sitting here. So if we are on the top of clerics, what is your favorite subclass for a cleric and why?
Mm-hmm.
What you guys have one? Do you guys know what?
I do.
Or which one's yours, Wally?
My favorite, just because I enjoyed playing it so much, was the Twilight domain.
Mm.
And it's just because oh my goodness, the abilities are just astounding. I mean, they're so much fun. I'm trying to look it up because I want to make sure I get this right, but it is, well, first off, Eyes of the Night. You get the dark vision out to 300 feet. And that allows me to play, when I did play this character, I played a Herringon. In fact, the whole party were rabbit folks. So,
that's sweet.
So they don't have dark vision, but with Twilight Cleric, I was like, okay, I've got dark vision. And then the Steps of the Night. Ben, look over here on D&D Beyond, so I don't get this wrong. It might be the Twilight Sanctuary. That's where you've got all this light that's moving around you, and it grants it temporary hit points. I'm struggling to find it, but I just remember being able to keep this aura around me, giving everyone these temporary hit points. And it was, I didn't know how much I would enjoy playing this subdomain, and then I played it, and I'm just like, this is the greatest thing ever.
Oh,
so yeah, so Twilight domain for me.
And you, Riker?
My favorite is the Trickery domain.
Okay.
I think I said that on a previous stream.
Yeah.
For a couple reasons. I love Invoke Duplicity. It's one of my favorite channel divinities. Just being able to make a duplicate of yourself and just have I like control on the battlefield. I like being in 2 places at once. I like that kind of options. However, there is one channel divinity, and I think is it Arcana, that I love more than anyone else. No, Knowledge. Let's try that. I have it up here.
Yeah. No, I believe.
Which one's the one where they can use like a like a destroy undead or a turn undead, but it's for any creature, like it's for devils or fays or.
I believe that's Arcana. I believe
it is Arcana. Yeah. I think that is one of my favorites because here's my thing. Here's a hot topic right here. I don't know why clerics just are angry against undead. I don't get it. I feel like devils make just as much sense, yet that's the only subclass that really allows that. And to me, angels and demons have a lot more dissonance than like mortality and angels and death. I don't know. Like I feel like mortality versus immortality is the dichotomy there, where angels and demons should be more. To me, it makes more sense. But maybe you guys can elaborate on that as well.
I think it's a deep cut back to previous editions of D&D, right? The cleric,
for sure.
The cleric was the warrior against the undead, so it's just one of those things that's traditionally just been kept within their class fantasy specific for the game. While me also like the newer 5th edition D&D baby player, like we bring in that other aspect of like playing video games and other forms of media we've interacted with, where we would see the cleric as more they are in the middle of the fight between good and evil. They are fighting with devils and demons, and they're trying to uphold and protect and be on the side of angels, right? So yeah, I think if we were to see a like in a new, not even that this next update, but like in a 6th edition, 7th edition, I think we would probably see more of that influence put more into the cleric as more players and shift into the game. And that's one of the things. It's just a super deep cut for previous editions. They are the force between undead, and I think I don't know, Wally. What edition did you start off with when you played?
Red Box D&D.
Red Box. Okay.
Yeah, first edition in that era. So, yeah, it was. If I recall correctly, there was like a chart, and as you went through levels, you could turn undead, and then I don't remember if it went by hit dice or number of undead, but there's like a certain number that you could turn, and then once you got to more powerful levels or higher levels, those smaller undead, then you just started blowing them up like you're popping balloons. So encountering 4 skeletons at levels 1 through 3 in the old days, you could turn them, but like once you hit like level 7 or 8, then you just, they just be destroyed instead of turn. So, but yeah, that was the main focus of the cleric back then, was to being able to heal and to be able to turn undead.
Yep. All right. So,
I really like this comment from Kickstar. It's basically you like a cleric that can be the Winchesters.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, essentially. Yep.
All right, and I'm gonna say quickly my favorite clerics. I have 3. Mechanically and it's mechanically peace domain cleric. Mechanics, it's just a really good team oriented cleric, but the themes don't match up with the mechanics, because you're supposed to be peaceful, but mechanics actually let you help your teammates kill things faster. So it was a little disconnect for me. Then for a physical cleric, Tempest cleric, I really love the flavor of that, like getting hit and then just throwing lightning back at people and just being in the middle of the fight. It's just super awesome. You can kind of play off that Infinity War scene with Thor, where he just shows up in Wakanda and just smash everybody. That's how I see the Tempest cleric. And then knowledge cleric, I really like the versatility of its what's it called, channel divinity. I super value skills.
Yeah.
I think it's a really good system to lean on, especially if you're playing a character that's not really a magic based character, so like a rogue. But even then, like with a cleric, a knowledge cleric is a good, very flexible. You need somebody to kind of just like do the specific task, and nobody in your party for some reason doesn't have that skill or they don't have that tool. Boom, knowledge cleric steps in and okay, I have it. I figured it out, and boom, you can do it. All right, so that's that. And then, okay, next question was from Evrav. What type of interactions could clerics have with each other, as in, say, a death cleric meets a life cleric?
Good question.
Yeah, good question. I think in general, when you're going to have clerics kind of like meet up and talk, it's going to be like college philosophy majors kind of just sitting there talking about theories and different philosophy viewpoints. That's really what you're going to have. Unless they're on specific factions, obviously, because D&D is still a combat-based game. So if they're specifically on different factions and believe in gods that generally hate each other, then they're going to be moving and doing things to kind of counteract each other. But if it's just like 2 dudes that kind of just meet up in a town square and be like, oh, hey, I believe in Umberly. Well, I believe in this one. Okay, well, they're just going to sit there and debate.
I can see that. I think it comes down to me, PCs versus NPCs.
Yeah.
Because if you have, because it depends on how you see your cleric pushing their religion. Are they quiet about it? Just every once in a while they go off to silent prayer, or I don't know how many of you have watched Dice Camera Action, where there is a paladin that's played and they talk about Lathander all the time. Like every other sentence has something about how great Lathander is. So are you trying to push your religion on other folks? Are you more quiet about it? So as far as like a light versus dark or whatnot, it just boils down to the PCs and how do they try to perpetuate their their religion? Do they maybe they just make snide remarks, be like, well, your God didn't help you there, now did they? Are they trying to convert? I mean, that's the other thing. So, as a dungeon master, because I wouldn't think that we'd have two clerics that were PCs. I mean, it doesn't always seem to happen that way. I mean, it's hard enough to find somebody to play the cleric sometimes, but it seems like that interaction is going to be an NPC versus a PC, and it would probably for me just depend on how I want to play that NPC. Maybe as a DM, are they trying to belittle that person and their god, thinking they're not as good as mine? Do they have that mutual agreement, like you said, Josh, where they're kind of just like, yeah, we can have a great discussion, maybe some religion checks, share thoughts, maybe there's some things we have in common. So all kinds of different ways you can go about that.
Yeah, I think it's like that too. If you're curious about the other face, like if you wanted to understand the other person, I think it definitely does. I use the word alignment, like it depends on your alignment, but it depends on like how you view alignment. But just for sake of continuity, if you have a very neutral cleric, they may not care.
Yeah.
Right. I currently play in my campaign a cleric of Melora, the nature god, and she doesn't care. She's like your faith is your own. Everyone has their own faith, and it's whatever helps you and benefits your life and whatever, But you might have someone that is like, you're wrong. The only way to succeed in this life or to become exalted or however you see it is by following this particular god. So it definitely depends on the cleric you're playing.
Yep. Thank you for the question. Now we'll get to Wolfsbane. Thank you again for the $5 super chat. He is playing in a modern one shot in Florida, but he's stuck between choosing a Tempest cleric or a fighter. His question is, how would he play a cleric in modern day? Let's see. And then you're specifically Tempest cleric. Yeah, this is a tough one just because normally when you think of clerics or any sort of spiritual person, they're not going to be very combat oriented, at least in a modern perspective of it. But really depending on what you're doing, I would lean into maybe the more martial aspects of the class of the Tempest cleric. If you're going to go with a modern, maybe they're former military or something that's where they got their martial training. And that they found their faith, so they're more like playing more kind of like a holy warrior, is how I would see it, and just really dive into that for a modern setting. Maybe they did some tours out in the Middle East or somewhere else, depending on which setting you're doing it, if it's based in actual real world or not, especially for modern day.
I think hurricanes have got to be a big part of that,
Oh,
don't they? I mean,
yeah.
I mean, Florida's known for their hurricanes, so I mean, maybe maybe there's this guy. I kind of picture Storm from X-Men for some reason. This massive hurricane that's coming towards Florida, and there's this like god or entity. It doesn't even have to be a god; it could be like a patron or some angel or something like that coming out of the middle of this hurricane. And when it blows through, like you're the only one there, and there's nothing but waste around you, and that's where you can. That's where your religion, your clericness, I guess, starts off. As far as picking between a cleric and a fighter, it depends on level. Because if you're going at a higher level, I'd multi-class. But
Yeah.
that's just me. But yeah.
I would say that if you wanted to check out a good example of a modern day cleric, there's Unsleeping City from Dimension 20. It's a live play that they have a cleric of the city, I guess you could say. Yeah. But when you mention like modern day clerics, you could think of modernization, and to that I mean like atheism. And I think that's another question that we had was, how do you have a cleric in a world that maybe the gods are proven to exist? Like they walk around, like there's no doubt that they're there. How does atheism still work? And it's one thing of knowing the gods that are there, and another thing of thinking that they are gods instead of just very powerful beings, right? Like these gods are just entities. In no way does that benefit me in worshiping them. They're real, sure, but are they gods? In my opinion, no, kind of thing. So maybe playing with that.
Yeah,
and I have a
go for it, Wally.
I have a perfect response for that, and that just takes me right to Theros.
I was about to say the same thing.
Gods, yeah, those gods are proven, but the Leonin is the race that doesn't believe in those gods.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then even to that too, like you take inspiration from comics, Batman, I believe, Mr. Terrific, the modern one, are very much the same way. Give me a sec. Are very much the same way. They know that the gods exist. They are real things, but they also just acknowledge that they are superpowered beings, that they're high powered beings, that they're not necessarily gods themselves. And it's something that people find weird about Batman because they don't really realize that. But somebody that's that logical and very analytical, they're gonna think in that way, like, yep, their gods are just another tier of powered being. It's not faith based, especially you have them on your super team. That's, you know, you're sitting there with Superman and then Orion from the New Gods. You're gonna kind of have that perspective. All right. Thank you for the super chat. Let me see. Okay, next question. Okay. I don't know how familiar you guys are with the Critical Role Tal'Dorei book, but that book had a blood domain cleric. Hold on. I think,
Not familiar with that.
okay. Blood
I know
domain.
of it.
Okay, blood domain is like similar. It kind of has like powers similar to on Avatar: The Last Airbender, where they were blood bending, where they were like was a waterbender that was able to bend the blood inside people's bodies and kind of control them like a puppet. And sorry guys, I'm seeing that we're having a little trouble on the stream right now, so bear with me. Bear with me. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. Okay, seeing that we kind of got stuck. Give me a sec. Are you guys still there? Okay.
The gods are angry.
Yeah, give me a sec. Let me try something tech difficult. Switch over to this one really quick. Let me see what's going on. Okay.
Is it just cutting out? Is that it?
Yeah, it's freezing up on your guys's. Okay, here we go. Okay. We're gonna have to roll with this one. Okay. Okay, so sorry about that, guys. So what have you guys seen for the? How would you guys play this? It's a domain class from Matt Mercer Critical Role's Tal'Dorei book, the first one, and it really goes into really just trying to. Okay, I think that this is why. Okay, actually, guys, give me a sec. I'm gonna put this on tech while we try to figure out what's going on, because yep. All right. Gotta just check you. Sorry about that, guys. It messed up. Okay, here we guys go. We're gonna do a little quick audio check on your guys' end. Okay, here. Okay, but for some reason your guys' audio is not coming in. Sorry about this, guys. Let's see what's going on. Check it again.
Checking it again.
Hello.
There we go.
Testing.
There we go. Cool. All right. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, back to this question. Okay, how would you guys approach the blood domain from Tal'Dorei, but don't want to be evil alignment or have a specific deity? I have an immediate answer for this, but I don't know if you guys need some time to think on this one.
Just a few moments.
I want to hear.
Okay, my answer is look to Eberron. There is a faith called Blood of Vol. They believe that the blood themselves is divine. That the gods are the gods have played a trick on people. That it's all about self improvement and believing in yourself, and that as long as you try to be the best version of yourself, and try to make the people around you the best version of themselves, that you eventually will find divinity and become a god yourself. That is like the core belief of it. So they have this aesthetic of being like looking evil because it's all red and blood and dark, and they were kind of seen as a cult. but in reality, that's the core tenets. It's like it's about self improvement and self embetterment. So I would play that. I would play into that, like, because there is no core God in that belief, that religion. It's more so that you yourself can achieve divinity as long as you do right by the people around you, by yourself, and by your society.
Yeah,
You know what I
when I hear, sorry, go ahead.
You're fine. Go ahead.
Oh god. I when I hear blood magic, my brain automatically goes to like witches, and that kind of magic that you can go for. But it also reminds me of olden day medicine with the four humors, if you're familiar with that. Like blood and bile and other types of inner liquids, I guess. Um, but playing up with like the doctor route in an olden day form as well. I honestly think that you could play up a life cleric and a death cleric in a very similar way, where blood is just the form of life, kind of what you were saying, where you look at it as something that gives life, or it's something that keeps us in our mortal body. And in order to pass on or get to heaven, we need to rid ourselves of that impurity. So I like a lot of the lore behind blood and what it's meant throughout the ages, and it would be really cool to explore those things with a cleric.
I like both of your answers so much that I really don't even need to throw in too much after that. The only thing that went to my mind right away was something scientific. I think of messing around with microscopes and beakers and things like that. So
Yeah,
maybe something with that with blood, but other than that, that's about all that I could come up with.
that's actually cool. I
Yeah.
like that a lot.
Oh, I can see that like kind of fitting into Ravnica with like the Simic a little bit.
Oh,
They're mixing with the
yeah.
biology. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you again, Wolfsbane, for another $5 super chat. I can do either Life or Tempest, and was thinking of a weapon expert or combat medic. Also, what's your favorite cleric homebrew or ones that you've made? Favorite cleric homebrew. Ooh.
Weapons expert or
I got
combat.
one.
Okay, go for it. I got to think on like my favorite homebrew of it.
My favorite cleric homebrew is the cleric that I'm playing now, so the one of Melora. She's actually a Furbolg Sky cleric. So a lot like the Tempest, but I felt like the Tempest, it was more of the anger of the sky and the harshness of Storm, and it didn't really portray like a calmness or a serenity of like an open field and the open sky. And so I made with some help with my DM, a cleric that's what freedom means to them, like a freedom cleric that can fly and control wind and has a lot of spells that coincide with that. So much fun.
Yeah, actually sounds really cool. Different, they're totally different take from Tempest Cleric, where normally Tempest Cleric is like all like power
Yeah.
and just like rage, and taking the more of the rageful storm aspect. So this completely turns on its head. It's like no, it's at peace, it's serenity. Do you have a homebrew or cleric or one you've made, Wally?
I do. Looking at Wolfsbane's question, the first part I wanted to answer first, thinking of a weapons expert or a combat medic. And I was just curious if maybe you were prior military or something, and that's why you're asking. I just wanted a little bit more clarification on that part of on the question. The second thing, I have encountered 3 different homebrew, so I'm homebrew clerics, so I'm going to mention all 3 of them. I've actually done character builds for 2 of them. It's been quite a while back, and that's just because I've had friends on Twitter and YouTube that have developed them, so I thought, heck, let's do a brew. And one was the coffee domain cleric, which used a lot of stuff to and get you going, and haste and things of that nature. So that one was fun. The other one was the sacrifice domain cleric that was done by Mr. Tarask. And I think it's on like Drive Through RPG, and its primary ability is I think if I recall correctly, its primary thing is at the end of a campaign they just like sacrifice himself and just do like this massive amount of damage, but it was really neat. It had some really cool features to it. But if I were to pick one that is not 5th edition, I think I'd have to go with the beer domain cleric out of from Kobold Press.
Yeah.
Just because I love beer, and that's just like right up my alley. And if I were to develop my own, that's where I would start. I'd probably make something close to that.
Oh, yeah, the beer one's fun, hilarious. I had bought that book when we were getting close to wrapping up our my group Storm King's Thunder campaign, and one of the big things one of the players did was he created a tavern, but specifically a brewery. That's pretty much what his tavern one was, a brewery. So, and I showed it to him as like, hey, maybe you want to multi-class into this really quick, because just you're. But he never ended up going with it. But yeah, that one was like the most hilarious thing I saw from that book. I believe like my favorite homebrew one. It's like soft homebrew. It's from the Plane Shift for Amonkhet. So before they did the D&D magic books, they had these small PDFs that would come out that you can play 5th edition in the magic settings. Amonkhet was their ancient Egypt based one, for those not familiar with it. But just like Theros, the gods were very prominent in that setting. And there was one god for every single color. So my favorite one was Zeal, the red one, but it's because I'm a red player. Sorry guys, it's just one of those things. But yeah, it was just it incorporated a lot of what War and Tempest domain clerics abilities were to do, and I thought like if you take that and put that into Ravnica, that's like perfect for Boros. You know, it's you can take that, and if you want to be you can take it and put it into Eberron. I was like, oh, that's sweet. That can be House Lorandar, which they have the mark of the storms. Like it just fit perfectly with all these. Or if you just wanted to play like some sort of cleric that was binding themselves to like elementals and fighting in the war, I thought that was like a perfect thing to use for that too. So yeah, it just had a lot of flexibility in what it was doing, but it's stupid strong. Like I don't recommend it. You know, it has the one channel, or I believe it's the channel divinity, where you can just maximize the damage of the similar to the Tempest cleric of any lightning or thunder spell you do. But since it was Zeal, it was fire and thunder, and they put fireball on the domain spell list, so you just maximize your fireball and cast it at max level, and just it was too strong, too strong. Yeah. So yep. So yeah.
One more thing I want to say on the combat medic as well is like I feel like cleric is a really good option for that, but also don't hold yourself to just clerics if you want to be a healer. I'm just looking it up now. There's a fast hands feature with the rogue, and if you wanted to be a combat medic where you use that feature just to pass out potions and to heal people that way, that's a perfectly valid way to do that. Combat medics are fun because there is a lot of different classes that you can be for that. That will work well.
And thinking military wise there too, I would almost go paladin, just because you get that aura. I mean, thinking of being on the battlefield, you're able to fight, you're able to heal, and you're able to protect. So I would probably go paladin over cleric if I were to try to do like a military type of a person.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Okay, I got 3 more questions. I'm looking at the time too, and I know we kind of got disrupted with a little tech difficulty, so I'm gonna try to get through these. And also, if you guys have any more questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat. One question I definitely wanted to touch on: what are some ways a player can facilitate roleplay with their god? So this goes back to my whole idea of giving toys to your DM. But most of the time, obviously, when you're playing a game, the DM has the tools to just say, "Hey, your god wants you to do this." What are some ways that the player can open that up and kind of throw the DM a bone and say, "Hey, I'm trying to do this. How can I go about it?"
I have an important with narrative, make sure that what you see your god as is similar to how your DM sees your god or its tenants. And for this, I have an example. I played a blood hunter a couple years ago who worshipped a god of redemption. And the way that I understood redemption and what that meant for my character was not how my DM understood redemption and how this god facilitated that. So there was a couple times where like we kind of rubbed wrong with those things on how like this god is portraying how my character should be enacting their tenets, and this god got mad at some things that I was doing because I thought redemption was one way. And if that's how you want to play like that dynamic between you and your god, I think that's awesome too. It's just knowing that that is how you're playing that out with your DM. Because again, a lot of people see things a lot of different ways. People see love different ways. And so when you play a narrative with you and a god, make sure that you and your DM is on the same page of what that god actually looks like.
100% agree. That's a big that can be applied to anybody, especially during session zeros. For any sort of class, you're trying to flavor your play your character a certain way that has very very strong ties to a big class narratives, similar to Warlock, I would say, and then Paladin with their oaths, Druid and their connection to the world itself. Make sure to talk with your DM, especially if you want to lift that narrative and heavily lean into it while you're role playing, so that everybody's on the same page, so that you're not trying to interact with something that you see one way, and then the DM's like, well, no, it's like this, and you have to play it this way, and then you're left with a kind of like a half experience where you're not really fulfilled and you don't feel excited to really play your character anymore. You gotta want to prevent that. Or what do you got, Wally?
I think there's a number of ways to facilitate the role-playing part, and obviously interacting with NPCs. And I would probably about that, like if there's someone that's hurt or whatnot, go through and take the chance to expend a first level spell slot to cure wounds. And then after that, be like, have you heard about the teachings of Lathander? He has healed you today. Perhaps come to the spires of the morning with me tomorrow and check it out, or something like that. Or talking about like that beer domain cleric we're talking about earlier. Perhaps I'm in at the yawning portal as a beer domain cleric, and there's someone that's passed out with their head down on the bar, and I'm able to do something or whatever else that lets them sit up and start drinking again, or they don't get all of these side effects from drinking, whatever, and just kind of, I think, able to the role playing wise, you kind of do things for other people, or you do things to do, I think doing things for NPCs, and then after you be like, oh, okay, they appreciate that or whatever else, and then you just go into the, well, you can do this too if you sign here and go to church and things like that.
Yeah, 100% agree. I'm right now. I'm also trying to look up at the clerics because I know there's actually mechanics built in to the class that lets you kind of force that interaction. At level 10, you get divine intervention. That is another way that you can mechanically support you sort of interacting with your god. That kind of forces your DM to do it. And that for those that may not know or may not have played a cleric yet, the divine intervention says at beginning at 10th level, you can roll your deity. You can call on your deity, to intervene on your behalf when your need is great. Imploring your deity's aid requires you to use your action, describe the assistance you seek, and roll percentile die. If you roll a number of equal to lower than your cleric level, your deity intervenes. I've had this work pull off in one of my games. One of our players was playing a war cleric who was falling. I believe is when my artificer character couldn't figure out the controls for a falling castle, a storm giant's castle. We're fighting cloud giants, and and then the character leaped off and was like, well, I need to go grab something. And he called upon his deity, rolled the right amount to get it. And then he was saved by an angel from his deity to come to get him and whoever he was falling from. Yeah. We've seen it in a Critical Role. I know they've done it. It was like a big thing. Spoilers for those that haven't seen the end of season or campaign 2. that it played a big pivotal role in the ending of that one, where they were able to return a character they after a failed death save as they were trying to resurrect Molly Mock. That was like the big storyline, and coincidentally, the character that originally played Molly Mock used divine intervention, rolled, and saved his own old character. So yeah, that's based into the cleric class. That is one way you can kind of force it on a mechanical level. And it just like everybody else said, like you got to figure out how to use your spells and on your skills and stuff as a ways to kind of sort of interact in a way that represents your faith or your character's ties. I think flavoring them really heavily in that way, saying little prayers as or maybe with your DM develop sort of sayings that members of those faith would have, similar to how like the Jedi said, "Oh, may the Force be with you." Maybe your cleric in that specific religion has those little sayings that when they meet somebody, it's very common for them to say, again, Tempest cleric, may the skies be clear, or something like that. You have these little things that are tied to your religion. I would really look into that.
Like that. So I misunderstood the question just a little bit, but yeah. So if you want as a player to interact directly with the god, then I mean prayer, is probably the best choice, especially if you're in a situation you just like, my character is going to sit over here and pray while the rest of them try to dig us out of this rubble so we can escape or whatnot. I can actually think of more stuff as a DM that I would do if a player were to take that effort either through prayer or action or something like that, and a god doesn't have to, or a deity doesn't have to necessarily speak or appear or something like that. Perhaps they're all injured and they find they find some symbols, maybe it's a hammer or something like that, and they find this hammer, they move on a little bit, there's something they can break, they break it, and there's like a healing pool or something like that. So their god could like lead them to different places or interact with them, and it doesn't have to be through speaking or through appearing in front of them.
And that actually brings us to the second question. What are some ways deity could interact with a character without completely intervening or railroading the campaign? So this is more of a DM-facing question to help you. If you're in the DM chair and you want to help your cleric player kind of facilitate their roleplay more. So what can the DM do to allow to actually act as their god without railroading your campaign? And also, why would the DoD want to interact with the player character whatsoever? Especially if you're starting off like a level 1 campaign and you're going through the level progression.
My immediate reaction to that is almost a non-answer in saying like, if your cleric has a god, they're most likely going to be a part of the story in some way. If you have players that want to play out specific things, you want to allow those things to be played out. So almost interacting with a god, to me, really wouldn't take away from the campaign if you're playing to what your characters wanted to play. It would instead, to me, help the campaign get to where it should be going, or help your character get to where they should be going. So almost leaning into that instead of seeing it as something that would derail it, but seeing it as something that would benefit your campaign.
What do you got, Wally?
I mean, to like go to like side quests and things like that. And I always think of adventures going from like town to town. Kind of a hard question to answer. So let's say that they are traveling to places, and perhaps there's through NPCs or something that approach the cleric. Oh, I see you're a cleric of Lathander. Well, hey, we have an issue. Can you come help us or whatnot? Maybe that NPC is sent through by the god. I mean, maybe the god wants to sure that they have a presence in a city where they don't have a presence. Maybe they don't know anything about this god there. So I think you can do it just through subtle hints things like that, whether finding an ancient scroll or having an NPC approach a character and have those gods reach out in that way to try to widen their range, to try to help others or whatnot. And it might not always be, I mean, gods can be selfish sometimes as well. So maybe there's something that they see that they want done. And, oh, hey, there's one of my clerics. I'll use that cleric as a tool to be able to get this done.
Yeah, my answer is it's really for DMs. Really consider what your setting and the cosmology really is, and the mood you're going for. And just going based off of the official 5th edition settings, like Forgotten Realms, the gods exist, they're there, but they don't actively act, right? They don't actually force their presence on there. So it's like this weird sort of structure where they enact their power, but not necessarily themselves at any point in time. They normally go through the clerics. So if the god is going to act, they're probably going to act through their clerics and other faith-based representation in the setting. So really, really consider that, and having another cleric sort of be like the middleman for them. Or maybe they have some sort of messiah character that kind of pops up and is like their new chosen, that's like a rival to your cleric. Maybe it's more of a test of faith, or a false prophet. Maybe that can be a sort of thing too. I would also maybe, at least in a Forgotten Realms sort of classic fantasy setting where the gods exist, one thing I try to make sure is like I don't make the gods the answer to the problem. I make them the quest giver, or the way for them to find the answer. So the player's always active, and that's the thing that it's them doing it, not necessarily the god just coming in and saying, Deus Ex Machina, here's your problem solved. It's all good.
Yeah. I think gods are a DM's tool to develop the story, not a player tool to mess your campaign up.
Yeah. And that's a big thing to realize. Like they should help the player tell the story. They're another story element. They should not be the answer. It's not bad that every once in a while, especially like these big epic moments, that the god will come in and do something, but that should be sort of like the payoff, the thing where their faith is rewarded. That the god finally comes in and is like, yeah, I'm coming in to help you do that thing so we can stop the bad guy because he threatens everything. That's when you should kind of pull the god moment on stuff. And other settings, Theros, and you're playing with more classical Olympian style gods, they are very much human. They very much have flaws. They are very, very active. They need to be scheming. They need to be plotting against each other and using their clerics and other faithful as pawns in their own schemes. And they will only reward you if the more you act on those schemes or believe in them. So really consider that, and it still plays into Forgotten Realms, is that they aren't the end all be all, but they're the puppet masters in the background. They're acting through other people. But I think Theros and Olympian style gods are going to be more active in a world, and just kind of consider that, because I think I could say if you're setting up a Theros game, every member in the party, they don't have to be cleric aligned, but they're going to have some sort of faith and connection to one of these gods. Yeah. And that actually brings me up to my second question, or pretty much my last question I had was, and it's not on the sheet, sorry guys. This was more so I've seen a lot of questions regarding like, hey, how do you play, like, pretty much the question is, how do you play a cleric without actually playing a cleric? Which way do you flavor other classes and take the narrative of the cleric and still play it without actually playing, using the mechanics of the class?
I like the Winchester idea.
And what classes lend themselves to that narrative, or what mechanics lend themselves to that narrative without actually playing the cleric?
Mechanics do?
Yeah, mechanics or player options that do. Like, I have a couple answers. I know Ebrav has been mentioning them in the chat. Celestial Warlock is a really, really solid one mechanically, that's supported with more divine based stuff. And I believe it's the Divine Soul Sorcerer is another strong one. It's
a fun class.
Yeah, both of those are really, really good if you want to lean into having a different relationship with your faith. I think that's really the way you got to kind of look at it. Obviously, Warlock's narrative is they bargained with a higher deity and are given their powers directly tied to them. and that kind of plays like you can play that as the chosen one factor. Maybe the deity chose you, and now you have this connection. And it's same thing with Divine Soul Sorcerer. There is that chosen one factor. Like you were born from the bloodline of a god or some divine deity. Why does that make you special? And what does that do? And also anybody that also wants to do more faith-based characters, Acolyte background is perfect for you right there. It's right there. You can play. You don't necessarily have to have holy power. Maybe you're a fighter that is an Acolyte that's more of a Templar. You're just a soldier for the church. You don't really have any sort of divine things, but you still have faith. But it's not strong enough to the point where the god is like, you believe in me enough, here's some holy power. Maybe that's something you can work to as you progress in multi-class later.
Yeah. And I think there's even like the magic initiate feat.
Yep.
So you could actually, so if you do go that route, you're just like a soldier. Like in my Waterdeep campaign, we had a warlock, but they were raised with Lathander. I mean, his patron was actually Kalar Argent, which is like an angel, but they still had this passion for Lathander and all this history with Lathander and the church, Spires of the Morning. So you can have someone like that where grew up with this deity or whatnot, and like you said, they're not a cleric. Maybe they they care about the church and stuff, but then throw in a feat like your magic initiate and you can get a few of those cleric spell levels and you can role play those out.
Yeah, I think every class can have a god. Every character can have someone that they worship and explain their powers by that god. I talk a lot about this in my my Druids Can Be Wizards 2 video, that like you can take the cleric and explain their powers like any other class. They could be born with it, like the Divine Soul Sorcerer, right? They could have some sort of deity that they or a divine sugar daddy, like a warlock, that they get their powers from. They could be like a paladin that they made oaths and they get their power that way. It's fun to kind of mix and match tropes and just have their mechanics explain that. Yeah. Right? You're not prescribed to being a missionary for a certain god every time that you play a cleric. It's a fun way to just kind of make it your own.
100% agree. Like I'm already thinking, it's like, man, how like Druid being some sort of faith-based character, like which domain or which circle I would choose. And then I'm also thinking back like rogues, because rogues, there is history of like assassins being used in for faith-based organizations. So some sort of religious assassin, and you can tap into that Assassin's Creed sort of lore too for a little bit of that for inspiration.
I actually have a rogue video coming out next week that talks about that too. I think that's awesome.
Sweet. Yeah.
What about monks?
Yeah.
I mean, monks would be perfect.
Yeah. Totally.
Everybody forgets about the monk, but yeah, monk is the other hand to like the religious section, and even though they're really based in Asian Asian aesthetics and mysticism, we've already seen it where they did the Monk of Mercy, where they are leaning into the more westernized sort of monk.
Yeah,
and Western monks aren't martial artists. They're cleric. They're pretty much what we would think of a priest and a cleric. So if you kind of sort of take it that route too, take the monk in that route and play more Western world, and just take any of the other martial arts fighting styles, the monastic orders, and treat them like actual faith-based organizations. And that's another way to play monk. Especially what's the Sun Soul is aka Laser Monk. That's how I see that one. That's another divine-based monk you can play.
I like the Ascendant Dragon Monk more like using the dragon is more like a patron or something. I think
that's true.
Be fun.
Yeah, like Great Worm deity. Yep.
Yeah, I believe it. It's strictly if I think Fizban says like it's tied to Bahamut also. So like it's directly tied. The fighting style's tied to Bahamut. The powers are tied to Bahamut. So it's already built into the base lore of the class too. If you were to want to go that route.
There you go.
Yeah. All right. I'm just double checking there any more questions. And then now we're starting to get into monk. monk discussion. I think, yeah, if you guys want to check out the monk discussion, I was joined by Indestructible Boy and Ross Leiser. You guys can check that out on the channel too. It was a really, really fun discussion. We'll be getting into more of those and more into these. And I want to say thank you, Wally, and thank you, Riker, for joining me on this one.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. First off, we'll start with Wally. Wally, where can they find you?
I have a YouTube channel that focuses on puzzles and traps, but I also do character creations, and that is Wally DM. And I also have a book on Drive-Thru RPG that's a bestseller, and it is the Journal of Puzzle Encounters.
Sweet, sweet, sweet. Definitely go check it out. And Riker, where can they find you?
Basically, the Cleric Corner on any platform. I'm currently going over a lot of these class theories and just reflavoring, reskinning, and making characters your own. Planning to do a live stream on Wednesday. This will be my first live stream, so stay tuned for that and watch out for that. But yeah, come by anytime.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Definitely go support these guys. All their information is down in the description below. Yeah. So this week, what did I have up? Since it was my Cleric week, my first video back up from the new year, I had four character ideas for the Tempest Cleric. So I doing a little something different, and I would love feedback from everybody. And it was just doing a little bit more homebrew and leaning into more of the character reflavoring. So definitely go check that out. Let me know if you guys just want me to kind of go back to my old format of here's what this class does and then the reflavoring stuff. Excuse me. I will definitely go back to that too. Other than that, you can check me out on my socials. Facebook is facebook.com/DungeoneersPackYT. Twitter is DPackYT, and on Instagram is DungeoneersPack. So again, thank you. You can support the channel directly on Patreon, Dungeoneers Pack, and then yeah, that's pretty much it. Next week, I don't know. We're probably going to do another class discussion. Maybe digging more into mechanics, or maybe do something a little more like this and go into the flavor of stuff. I will pick and see. Next week, a little hint. I'm going to be checking out the Warlord from 4th edition for next week's video, so kind of check out for that. And again, check out my video for the Tempest Cleric. And until next time, guys, you guys have a good one and take care.
Hey, guys.